For 7 decades, she kept a simple letter saved. It was not decorated, did not have elaborate words, nor official seals. It was just paper, ink, and feeling. But for Elisa, that letter was everything. A reliquary of memories, a mirror of your soul, an open wound that never healed. The folds were marked by time, the envelope yellowed, the letters are a little faded. But still, emotion overflowed from each line written by a hand that would never return. Many people collect objects throughout their lives, medals, photographs, love letters, but there is a special kind of memory that becomes sacred. For Elisa, that letter was a private altar, a bridge between the lonely present and a past full of love, hope, and pain. She never showed the letter to anyone, not to family, not to close friends. The letter slept in a small wooden box, stored at the bottom of a drawer that almost no one touched. And whenever someone asked about the past, she would look away, change the subject, or just smile with a melancholy that no one knew how to decipher. The world has changed dozens of times during these 70 years. Men went to the moon. The Cold War began and ended. New generations were born. Technology transformed communication. Love became digital, ephemeral, immediate. But for Elisa, love remained fixed in time, attached to that piece of paper that she received every time she opened the drawer. The marks of war can be seen in ruins, in history books, in anonymous graves scattered across forgotten fields, but there are also invisible marks, those that remain in the hearts of the people who stayed. And it was in this heavy silence, in this never-resolved grief, that Elisa lived, a whole life with a piece of it missing. And it all started with that letter. But what was it about this letter that was so powerful? Why couldn't she forget? Wouldn't it have been better to leave it behind and move on? Perhaps, for many, the answer would be yes. But for Elisa, that letter wasn't just a memory, it was a pact. An alliance with someone she loved deeply and who disappeared before her dreams came true. It was the last thing he left for her, and she kept it like someone who keeps the last breath of a love that time was unable to erase. This story is not about war, although it is in the background. It's also not just about romance, despite it being born from the purest love. It's a story about losses that are never fully overcome, about people who continue to live even when part of them has died along with someone else, and about how simple objects can carry a whole world of emotions. Throughout this video, you will learn about Elisa's story and the story behind the letter. You will understand how 2 lives crossed paths amid the chaos of the Second World War, how a love was born in an unlikely time, grew between bombs and silences, and found its culmination in a farewell written in ink and pain. You will also discover why this letter became the center of Elisa's existence, why she never threw it away, never wanted to read it out loud, and why, even with so many years passing, that memory remained intact in her soul. Get ready to discover a real love story that crossed time, a story about absence, hope, and what happens when life stops. But the heart insists on continuing to feel. It's not a happy story, but it's a true story. And like all true stories, it touches deep, where ordinary words cannot reach. Today, you will remember that sometimes love doesn't have to last forever to be eternal. And there are pains that, even as the years go by, continue to speak softly, as if asking for just one thing, to be heard. In 1943, the world was on fire. The Second World War was raging violently, and no one knew for sure what tomorrow would bring. Amidst the chaos, in the interior of a small European city, lived Elisa, a 19-year-old girl, dreamy, with lively eyes and a light smile. Daughter of a teacher and a seamstress, Elisa grew up surrounded by books, the songs her mother sang while she sewed, and the hopes of a better world that did not yet exist. She was one of those girls who seemed to have been born for the little delicacies of life. He liked to write in a blue-covered notebook where he recorded thoughts, poems, and daydreams. It was common to find her sitting on a bench in the central square, reading a novel or watching the city go by with the air of someone waiting for something or someone. And that someone appeared one spring night. The city had organized a charity ball to raise funds for soldiers at the front. The hall was decorated with flags, paper flowers, and candles. The village boys, many already drafted into the army, danced with their girlfriends in silent farewells, disguised as joy. Elisa went with her friends, without high expectations. I just wanted to dance to a song or two before heading home. But that night, Tomas was there. He was a young soldier, recently transferred to the region. He wasn't from the city, but he had curious eyes, like someone who was also looking for something more than war and pain. He wore his uniform with pride, but without arrogance. And when he saw Elisa for the first time, something in his eyes lit up. He approached her with a shy request to dance, and she, surprised, accepted. The dance was slow, and the two barely exchanged words, but there was something in the silence between them that said more than any conversation. When the song ended, Tomas asked her name, and Elisa smiled before answering. He commented that he was handsome, and she laughed, not out of vanity, but because something about that encounter seemed too surreal to be real. In the following days, Tomas began to visit the city more frequently. I found excuses to go to the bakery, the market, the church, always hoping to see her. And Elisa, although she tried to hide it, waited for these meetings with a racing heart. Little by little, the two began to walk together. First, short walks around the square, then whole afternoons talking under the shade of the trees. Tomas spoke little about the war. I preferred to hear Elisa talk about her dreams, her favorite books, her desire to see the sea, something she had never seen up close. He, in turn, told him about his childhood in the countryside, about the cold nights when he slept to the sound of the wind, and about the fear of not having enough time to live what really mattered. It was in that brief, intense, and precious time that the two fell in love. It was a new love, but full of urgency, as if they knew they wouldn't have much time, as if every gesture needed to be remembered forever. They wrote notes to each other, hid flowers in books, and made plans for a future together, after the war, a simple home, perhaps a small bookstore, a family, banal dreams, but which meant everything to them. Elisa knew that Tomas would return to the battlefield soon, and although he said he was fine with that, the truth was that there was a lump in his throat every time he thought about the day of departure. Tomas also knew the risks, but promised to return. Whenever he could, he said, "Wait for me, I'll be back." And she believed, because to love, at that age, was to believe with all your heart, even in the face of the impossible. No one saw them without being enchanted. They were the portrait of youth before goodbye, a promise of life in the midst of death, a reminder that even in dark times, love still found room to flourish. Before leaving, Tomas gave her a gift, a small necklace with a silver cross, "For you to remember me, and to protect me." Elisa wore the necklace every day after that. It was her way of keeping Tomas close, even when he was far away. When the train left, carrying Tomas, Elisa cried in silence. He kept that final hug in his chest, as if it were a goodbye, although they both pretended it wasn't. At the station, as the engines rumbled away, she tightened the chain around her neck and whispered, "Come back to me, Tomas." But the wind carried away his words before he could hear them. Their love had begun in the midst of chaos, but for Elisa, he was the only thing that made sense. Time was not kind to lovers. Right after that last hug at the station, Tomas headed to the front, and Elisa returned home with an empty heart and teary eyes. She knew that from then on she would live between hopes and expectations. The city streets remained the same, but Elisa's world had changed forever. Each morning began with the expectation of a letter, and each afternoon ended with a silent prayer for news, and they came. Tomas's letters were like beacons in the darkness of war, even when they didn't bring good news, even when they described the horrors of the trenches and the long marches in the intense cold. Each of them was a connecting thread between two worlds, that of the battlefield and that of Elisa's heart. The first arrived 2 weeks after the match. He talked about the long journey, about his fellow soldiers, and how the smell of gunpowder never seemed to leave his clothes. But the letter was also full of affection. Tomas wrote about how he missed her eyes, her light laugh, the calm she transmitted with a simple touch. He always signed the same way, "With eternal love, Tomas, wait for me." Over time, the letters became rituals. Elisa read them by the window, always in the late afternoon light. He read it once with his eyes, then with his heart. He kept each one, folded carefully, and organized them in a box that he kept locked in the closet in his room. It was his little library of love and hope. In the following letters, Tomas began to talk more about what he dreamed of. He wrote about how he imagined life with Elisa after the war. She drew scenes with words, the two of them walking hand in hand along the beach, even though she had never seen the sea. Simple dinners in a small house, full of books and comfortable silence, the lazy Sundays, her writing in her notebook, him tending a garden. They dreamed of children too, maybe 3, a dog, a common life, with its ups and downs, but lived as a couple. Nothing grand, nothing out of the ordinary, and maybe that's why it was so precious. Elisa, in turn, responded with equal enthusiasm. He sent scented sheets, dried flowers inside the envelopes, drew hearts in the margins. She wrote about her days, her work at the local school, her lunches with her mother, the long nights when she slept, hugging the necklace he had given her, and it always ended with the same words, "I'll be here when you get back. I love you, Elisa." The promises began to pile up. They were not just promises of love, but of life. Promises that they would survive that dark time, that everything they felt was real and deserved a future. That time, no matter how cruel it was, would not erase what they were building, even from a distance. The letters became more and more intense. In one of them, Tomas confessed that, once, during a bombing raid, all he could think about was Elisa, not in saving himself, not in fear, but in her, in the memory of her face, looking at him, at the ball, in the square, at parting. He said it was this memory that made him run, protect himself, and, above all, resist. "You keep me alive, even without knowing it. When everything shakes around me, I cling to the idea of you." That letter, in particular, Elisa never forgot. He read it so many times that he memorized every sentence, and on nights of uncertainty, when absence weighed more heavily, she repeated Tomas's words in a low voice, as if they were prayers. They were, without a doubt, creating a future, even apart. Every plan written, every word exchanged, was like a brick in the construction of an invisible house. A house made of hope, with foundations in trust and the memories they had together. But along with the promises came fear. Elisa didn't talk about it in her letters, but sometimes she cried at night, fearing that it was all just an illusion, that the world outside, so cruel and unpredictable, could take away from her the man she loved most. Yet even with these fears, she chose to believe. "I believed in love. I believed in Tomas, and he believed that God would keep them together, somehow." And so, life continued between letters and waiting. The promises did not diminish over time, on the contrary, they became more profound. Because, in the midst of war, promising the future was the bravest act anyone could commit. But the future, as Elisa would soon discover, doesn't always arrive as expected. It was autumn when the last letter arrived. Golden leaves already covered the sidewalks. The wind blew cold through the windows, and Elisa had spent the morning organizing the correspondence she had received from Tomas over the months. There was nothing special about that day, except for the envelope, which arrived with the same smell of old paper and the firm handwriting she already knew by heart. But something, before it even opened, seemed different. The way the envelope was folded, the ink was a little smudged, as if it had been written in a hurry. Elisa held the letter in her hands for a few minutes before finding the courage to open it. A shiver ran down his spine, as if time itself had stopped waiting for that moment. She sat at the kitchen table, where the afternoon sun streamed in through the thin curtains. With trembling fingers, he broke the seal and began to read. The letter was short, shorter than all the previous ones, but each word weighed like lead. Tomas began by saying that he felt a strange restlessness. Something inside him told him that the next few days would be difficult. He spoke of a new deployment, of unknown territory, of a tense atmosphere among the soldiers. But it wasn't fear he conveyed, it was silent acceptance, as if he knew, without knowing. "Elisa, if for some reason this is the last letter you will receive from me, know that I write it with all the love that exists within me. I have no regrets, except that I cannot be there with you right now. You were the best part of my life." She stopped. He took a deep breath, read it again. Every sentence, every curve of the letters seemed to pulse. Tomas had never written like that. He always spoke with hope, with that lightness that kept them both on their feet. But there was something definitive, an undeclared but felt farewell. "If I don't come back, move on. Don't live in eternal mourning. Promise you will smile for me, live for me, make our home, read your books, have children, travel, even if without me. I will be in every sunset, in every spring smell, in every page you turn. My love doesn't end with my body, it is eternal." The tears began to flow, silently. Elisa was shaking, with the letter in her hands, as if trying to stop the words from escaping. It was as if, by holding her tight, he could prevent that destiny from happening. But the letter continued. I'm not afraid of dying, Eliza. What breaks me is not seeing you again, not touching your hand, not dancing with you one more time. But if that happens, please, live everything we dreamed of. You deserve this. It was definitely the most painful letter I had ever read, not because of the harshness of the words, but because of their tenderness, for the way Tomas took care of her even from a distance. Even in his possible last message, love was not less, was greater than death. At the end of the letter, he wrote something different, a poem, short, simple, something he invented himself. If I don't come back, keep me in you, in the calmest corner of your chest, not as pain, but as shelter, where love is never undone. Eliza folded the letter carefully. He put it in the envelope, and, for the first time, instead of keeping it with the others, he placed it under his pillow. That night, she didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, remembering every detail of Tomas, the way he said your name, the smell of his coat, the way he looked at her in the silence, like someone who knows he's found his home in another human being. In the following days, no letters arrived. Elisa waited until time started to drag on. Hope did not die at once. It went out little by little, like a candle that burns out until only smoke remains. It was only weeks later that the news arrived. Tomas was missing in action. There was no body, there were no witnesses, just a vague, protocolary military report, a soulless piece of paper saying, considered missing, presumed dead. Elisa held that cold paper in her hands, but didn't cry. The pain was so deep that he became mute. Instead of crying, he went to his room, opened the drawer, took out the last letter, and read it once again. Then he placed it back in the envelope, kissed it as if it were Tomas' skin, and whispered, I promise to live for you, but I don't know if I can. At that moment, something broke. Inside her, not a collapse, but a thin, permanent crack. It was the beginning of a pain that would never cease to exist, a pain kept in silence, sealed between the lines of a last letter. And for 70 years, she never wrote again, but she never stopped reading. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. So, before we continue, hit the like button right now. This shows that you want more stories like this, and also helps bring this message of love and hope to more people. You must be wondering, what happened to Eliza after the last letter? How did she react to the news that would change her life forever? You are about to hear a part of the story that has never been told before. Intimate, moving, and deeply striking details. If this story has touched your heart so far, imagine what is yet to come. Imagine living a lifetime with a letter kept as a reminder of a love that never returned. I'm here telling this story with great care, looking for every detail so that it really touches you. So, if this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel now and activate the bell. This helps me to continue producing this type of content with soul and truth. And now, with all the excitement, don't leave the video. What comes next is one of the most intense and emotional moments in all of history. You will see how the news reached Eliza, how she reacted, and how the pain of absence began to be part of her life. The deepest and most unforgettable part of this story begins now. Stay with me. The days that followed the last letter were the longest of Elisa's life. She continued with her routine, trying to keep her mind busy. She helped her mother with homework, read to the children at the school where she volunteered, and wrote in her notebook of thoughts. But there was a shadow hanging over everything, an unsettling feeling, as if something was about to happen. And deep down, she knew that last letter wasn't just a letter. It was an omen. Silence became the new visitor to the house. Weeks dragged by without any correspondence. The mailbox, which was once a sign of joy and anticipation, was now just a reminder of absence. Every time Eliza opened the lid and found nothing, she felt her heart sink a little more. She tried to convince herself that the delay was normal, that the war made everything difficult. But inside, a growing anguish stole his sleep. Until, one cold morning, the news arrived. It wasn't a telegram, not a letter. It was a visit. A man in uniform, serious and restrained, knocked on the door of the house with an envelope in his hand. Elisa was alone at that moment. His mother had gone out to the market, and his father was at work. She answered it herself, not knowing that, by opening that door, she would also open a wound that would never close. The man introduced himself in a formal manner. He asked if she was Elisa Moretti. When she confirmed, he hesitated for a second, as if he didn't want to continue. And then he handed over the envelope with the army coat of arms and an expression that needed no words. "We have received information. Tomas Petrov is missing in action. He was last seen during a reconnaissance mission in enemy territory. There has been no contact since." Elisa didn't cry. She just stood there, looking at the envelope as if it were a foreign object that didn't belong there. The soldier continued talking, explaining details, dates, names, military terms. But it all sounded distant, as if it were coming from underwater. The word disappeared kept ringing in his mind. It was not a confirmation of death. There was no body. There was no evidence. It was worse. It was the absence of the end. It was the empty space where there should be certainty. It was the suffocating possibility that he was still alive, or not. It was a wound that didn't bleed, but that would never heal either. She nodded her thanks, closed the door calmly, and sat down on the sofa, still with the envelope in her hands. He opened it slowly, as if time could be controlled by his slowness. He read the impersonal, cold words written by an officer who probably never knew Tomas' name. And then, finally, he broke the silence. He cried. He cried like someone who no longer knew where to store so much pain, like someone who had something that was already part of their body ripped away from them. He cried with a muffled sound, so as not to alarm his neighbors, so as not to disturb the world. It was a contained but deep cry, like prayer in reverse. Instead of seeking comfort, it was a surrender to pain. The news spread through the city. Some approached to offer support, others out of simple curiosity. But Elisa closed herself off. "I avoided talking. I avoided going out. The only thing I did every day, without fail, was open the drawer, take out the last letter, and read it once again. Each reading was a reunion and a farewell." Her parents tried to console her. They suggested that she go out, visit relatives, change her environment. But Elisa refused. There was something inside her that said that love couldn't just end like this, that if he was really dead, she would know. I would feel it. But at the same time, the absence of any new information consumed her. It was like living in limbo, neither a widow nor a loved one, neither free nor trapped, just suspended in a time that didn't pass. She started writing letters even though she had no one to send them to. She continued writing, as if Tomas was still there, in some corner of the world, waiting to hear from her. He talked about the days, the changes in the garden, the new books he read. And in each letter, he left a part of himself. It was their way of keeping alive the promise they had made to each other, not to give up. But as the months and then the years passed, hope turned to permanent pain. No longer a sharp pain, like in the beginning, but a constant, silent pain, like a sad song that never stops playing. The news that arrived that freezing morning was the turning point in Elisa's life, not because it brought confirmation, but because it stole from her the only certainty she still had, that love, if it were strong enough, would overcome everything. She continued living, but it was never the same again. The war ended. The bombs stopped. The soldiers returned, some with glory, others with scars, but Tomas was not among them. Months passed, then years, and his name never appeared on the lists of rescued, prisoners, or in the official death records. For the army, he was just a number among thousands of missing people. For Elisa, he was everything she was missing. And then, the letter. Tomas's last letter, the one she had received just before the military messenger's visit, became more than a memory. It was now his most precious relic, an ordinary piece of paper, aged by hands and time, transformed into a sacred artifact of love and longing. Elisa kept it inside a thick envelope, along with the small poem he wrote. Then he placed it inside a dark wooden box that belonged to his grandmother. A box that once held jewelry and was now a safe for memories. The box was placed on her dresser, in the bottom drawer, under a pile of tissues and cloths that only she knew how to organize. It was his most intimate secret, and also his most revealing. Every day, when she woke up, Elisa opened the drawer, carefully took out the box and read the letter, not as someone looking for news, but as someone saying a prayer. Every word Tomas wrote became a ritual. She read in silence, in a low voice, sometimes in tears, sometimes smiling. And then he folded it delicately, as if he was afraid of hurting the paper. Time has not been kind to the letter, but Elisa has been. The fold marks became deep. Some letters began to fade, but she knew every sentence by heart. Reading was no longer through the eyes, but through the heart. That letter became his turning point. On good days, she read it to say thanks. On bad days, to remember what I had lost and what I still needed to carry. It became his refuge, his silent diary, his faithful companion. And no matter how much life went on in some areas, Elisa went back to teaching, maintained friendships, took care of her parents, lived for decades. There was something that never changed: her fidelity to the letter. To everyone else, she was discreet. I didn't like talking about Tomas, nor about the war. When asked why she never married, she smiled slightly and replied, "My heart found its home very early. It was not a choice based on eternal grief or bitterness." Elisa was not bitter. She was kind, polite, sweet, with children, and respectful of her neighbors. But there was a piece of his soul that was no longer there. He had remained on some battlefield, buried with the youth that never returned. And the letter was the only bridge that connected these two worlds, that of the woman who continued living, and the young woman who never stopped hoping. As the decades passed, the roles in life reversed. The girl who once dreamed of her future with Tomas has grown old. His dark hair was replaced by silver strands. The hands, previously light and firm, began to shake a little. But the letter, it was still there, aging along with Elisa, as if she were an extension of her. During the 60s, 70s, 80s, the world was changing at a frightening speed. Then came televisions, then computers, and then the internet. New ways of loving emerged, new ways of forgetting, of moving on. But Elisa remained firm, with her letter at the bottom of the drawer and the memory alive in her chest. The most curious thing was that, although she kept so many emotions in that box, she never showed it to anyone, not to nephews, not to close friends. The letter was a reliquary of the soul, something you don't share, that you protect, a sacred space between her and Tomas. No one else. Some people said she was lonely. Others considered her courageous for remaining faithful to a love that might not even exist if it weren't for those letters on paper. But Elisa never cared what they said. She knew the value that letter carried. It wasn't just paper, it was presence. It was Tomas saying he loved her, even when the world said he wouldn't come back. It was the last time she heard his voice, even if written. It was proof that love, when true, can survive time, war, and even absence. The letter was not a reminder of pain. It was a reminder of love, and that's why she guarded it so zealously. Over the years, the box began to contain other objects: an old photograph of Tomas, the silver chain he had given her, and a small dried rose that she picked from the garden the day she found out about his disappearance. But in the center of the box, like a silently beating heart, was it, the letter, guarded, protected, loved, as if it were Tomas himself, waiting for her. Time, they say, heals all wounds. But there are pains that don't want to be cured. There are loves that refuse to be buried as the days, months, years pass. And so it was with Elisa. The war was over. The newspapers reported victories, reconstructions, peace treaties. The cities were breathing again. Families welcomed their loved ones. Weddings were celebrated. Children were born. Life went on. But for Elisa, life went on in a different way. She didn't wear black out of mourning. She did not isolate herself from the world, like a martyr to lost love. On the contrary, he continued living delicately, with dignity, with silence. His heart, however, never returned to where it started. He never loved another man again, not because he didn't have the opportunity. Elisa was beautiful, sweet, intelligent. He received marriage proposals, invitations to go out, discreet looks, and clear intentions. But in all of them, she saw Tomas' shadow. And no other gaze was able to pierce that shadow. It wasn't sadness, it was loyalty. Elisa transformed her home into a haven of silent memories. He grew flowers in the garden with the same care as he folded the letter every morning. She had a shelf reserved just for the books she read, with Tomas in mind: novels, poetry, historical letters. It was as if, somehow, she still shared her days with him, as if he was still there, sitting in the armchair in the living room, listening to his voice. She made a career as a teacher. She was respected and admired by the students. He taught with passion, with lightness. He never brought sadness to the classroom, but there was something in his gaze, a subtle line, that made even the youngest people feel that there was a bigger story there than words could tell. Time passed. Decade after decade, Elisa followed her path. Youth gave way to maturity, which in turn gave way to old age. The city has changed. People left, others arrived. Life around was constantly renewed. But inside her, her love for Tomas was like an underground river, invisible to the eye, but present. In every heartbeat, every year, on April 17th, the date of the last letter, Elisa did something different. She woke up early, put on a blue dress that Tomas had once praised, and went to a field on the outskirts of the city. There, he would plant a flower or leave a candle burning. He never explained the gesture to anyone, he just did it, in silence. It was his ritual, his way of saying, "I still remember, I still wait for you." The people who lived with her respected this silence. Her closest friends had already understood that there was an untouchable space in Elisa's soul, a space that no one would ever occupy. It wasn't about chronic sadness, but about deep love, one that doesn't need physical presence to stay alive. As the years passed, Tomas' letter became even more valuable. Every stain, every fold, every faded line was a piece of Elisa's youth that remained there. It was as if, upon rereading the letter, she could go back to that night of the ball, to the train station, to that last hug. It was as if the letter were an emotional time machine. Elisa never had to say that she still loved Tomas. It was in his gestures, in the way he took care of the things he had touched. Don't be careful with the silver necklace, in the way he arranged the books on the shelf, in the music that sometimes played on the radio, a soft waltz that she danced alone in the living room, with her eyes closed. Love, this love, does not scream, he whispers, and time doesn't erase it. It just shapes it differently. It was as if Tomas had become part of Elisa's very essence. She was who she was because of him, and even though he was absent, he continued to shape his days. She didn't cling to theories or unlikely hopes that he was alive. I had no illusions, but she also never allowed the world to force her to forget. He chose to remember. He chose to keep love alive, not as a prison, but as a tribute, like the most beautiful part of a story that, despite being interrupted, never ceased to exist. Over time, the pain of loss turned into something different. It was no longer a piercing suffering, but a peaceful longing, like a small, constant flame. It was a pain that no longer screamed, but that still kept company on the longest nights. And even when her memory began to fail over the years, Elisa still remembered the words of the last letter. He could still recite Tomas's poem without reading it. He still knew the sound of her silent voice by heart. Time passed, but the love stayed. The years advanced, silently, like someone who doesn't want to interrupt a house where everything is quiet. Elisa aged slowly, without rushing, as if each year were a carefully unwrapped gift. And with her, her memories also aged, but never her love. It remained there, intact, like a dried flower between the pages of an old book. But what struck everyone around him most was the silence. Elisa was not a woman of great speeches. It was contained, discreet. I preferred listening to talking. His conversations were always delicate, as if he feared waking up ghosts with too many words. What about Tomas? He almost never said anything. Not a sentence, not a lament, not a shared memory. His name seemed to be kept in a safe inside, her locked, not out of denial, but out of zeal. Even those who had known her for decades knew little. Some friends knew she had lost someone in the war, but they didn't know the details. Others just guessed. They said, "Elisa is one of those women who truly loved, and that's enough." Tomas' memories lived in gestures and small rituals, in every flower she planted in the garden, in the almost ceremonial care with which he tidied up the house, in the way he arranged the cutlery on the table, as if he was always waiting for someone. There was always a second plate in the cupboard, an extra cup on the sideboard. It wasn't superstition, it was materialized longing. On Wednesdays, she prepared chamomile tea, always at the same time, a custom that had started in his youth, when he said it was the hardest day of the week and he needed something soft to avoid getting lost. He continued to do this throughout his life, and when he put the water on to boil, he would stop for a second, look out the window, and let his thoughts wander to somewhere where Tomas still existed. At the bottom of a closet, there was a small box with objects she never mentioned. The letter, of course, was the center, but there was also the silver necklace, a scarf, embroidered with their initials, and a photo of Tomas, now a little faded, taken before the war. Sometimes, on days when she was most homesick, she would open this box like someone visiting a sanctuary. He touched each item with reverence, as if time could be undone with his fingers. But silence was not the absence of pain. It was a form of respect. Elisa knew that there are pains that cannot be shouted about. They can be taken care of, and that true longing doesn't need an audience. She lived her memory with dignity, no dramatization, without excessive romanticism. It was real, and so, it was profound. The neighborhood children liked to visit her. She told stories, never her own, but from other times, of invented characters. It spoke of a soldier who became a poet, of a girl who embroidered letters to heaven, stories that no one knew, but that, deep down, had parts of their truth mixed with fantasy. It was the way she found to let some of her longing escape without revealing everything. A girl once asked, "Aunt Eliza, why didn't you ever get married?" She smiled tenderly, looked at the garden, and replied, "Because I already found what my heart was looking for, and he accompanies me to this day." The girl didn't completely understand, but years later, this same girl, now an adult, would say that it was one of the most sincere moments she had ever witnessed in her life. And so, Elisa's memories were preserved, not in photo albums or old videos, but in the empty spaces of the house, in the letters that no one read, in the silences that said more than 1,000 words, in the music that played softly on the old radio, in the sound of the rain falling as she looked out the window. It was an apparently simple life, but full of presence. Tomas was in everything. In your favorite cup, in the scent of lavender soap, in the book reread, in the autumn sunset. It wasn't a ghost. It was a love that never ceased to exist. And Eliza didn't imprison him in the past. She carried him with her in silence, every day. There was a kind of beauty in this way of living, an elegance in the way she chose to carry her story. No hurt, no revolt, no begging for comfort, only with love, pure, intact, unshakable. To those who observed her from the outside, it seemed that Eliza led a peaceful life, but the most sensitive ones knew there was an entire sea hidden beneath that silence, a sea of memories, of unfulfilled hopes, of dialogues that never happened, but also peace, because loving like this, so deeply and for so long, wasn't a prison, it was a choice. She never forgot Tomas, but she also never let pain define her. He preferred love to shape his days, even in silence. Elisa turned 50, then 60, 70, 80. He experienced the seasons repeating themselves, the city streets changing, the houses around being renewed. He saw technology invade everyday life, customs transform, values change, but inside her, there was something that remained the same, an old pain, soft, silent, but present, always present. It was a pain that didn't scream. It wasn't one of those that paralyzes or despairs. It was more subtle, like a sad song playing in the background of existence. You can continue living, working, smiling, but the melody is there. No matter where she is or what she's doing, she never stops playing. This was Elisa's pain. She aged gracefully. She was one of those ladies who crossed the square slowly, with a book under her arm and a serene expression, yet well-kept white hair, fragile hands, and a deep gaze. She was respected by everyone, loved by children, admired by the youngest. Many saw her as a symbol of balance, of tenderness, of silent strength, but no one imagined what she carried inside. Tomas's letter, now almost undone by time, remained in its box, folded with all the care in the world. Elisa reread it less and less with her eyes, because she no longer needed to. The words were burned into his memory, as if they had been written on his own skin. Each sentence still had the same effect. Every curve of his handwriting still brought back an image, an emotion, a piece of a time that never came back. And although time had softened the pain, it never went away. It's common to hear that grief has phases, that the loss is overcome, digested, overcome. But there are losses that cannot be overcome, that cannot be digested, that cannot be overcome. They just settle down. Elisa was not paralyzed by what she had lost, but she also never forgot. Tomas' absence was not a closed chapter. It was a continuous point that ran through all his days. She took him with her through the details. I still put 2 cups on the table some mornings. I still lit a candle on his birthday. She still kept the dried flowers that she collected from the garden on dates that only she remembered. and on some nights, even when she was old, she would dance alone in the living room to the sound of the waltz playing on the radio. With her eyes closed and her hands on Tomas' imaginary shoulders, his younger neighbors found it poetic, but it wasn't poetry, it was true. Elisa lived like someone who loves someone who is no longer here, but who never really left. The pain, although constant, never turned into resentment. She never cursed war. He never blamed God. He never questioned destiny out loud. His grief was mature, silent, and, in some ways, peaceful, because she knew she had something that many will never have. A true, pure, real love, even if it was brief. This awareness did not lessen the longing, but it made sense of the pain. As the years passed, his movements became slower. My vision was failing a little, my hearing too, but when someone asked her how she was, she always said, "I'm fine, I just miss him." Just that. It was as if he was saying, "I already have everything, I'm only missing the essentials." And when the people closest to her tried to talk about the possibility of moving on, of starting over, Elisa just smiled, with that calmness that disarms any argument. She didn't need a fresh start. He had already chosen his path a long time ago. The pain she felt was companionable, not an enemy. It was the presence of love in the absence of man, and that was beautiful, no matter how much it hurt. Elisa also knew that the world had changed. I knew that young people had fast, intense, but sometimes fleeting loves. He observed everything with tenderness, but also with a certain distance, like someone who belongs to another era, like someone who experienced something rare, so rare that it didn't fit into modern words. And yet, she didn't judge. I just kept it, in silence. The pain never got old, just like love. Both remained intact, side by side, inside her, like two wings of the same bird, one made of memory, the other of absence. And when they asked what she would have done differently, if she had the chance, Elisa replied, "Nothing. I loved him, and that's enough." The answer was simple, but behind her were decades of longing, of lonely nights, of interrupted dreams. And, above all, there was a love that survived war, time and distance. A love that never died, because the pain never got old. Time, although silent, has a curious way of bringing to light what seemed forgotten. And that was how, now in her 90s, Elisa saw her dormant story being rediscovered by chance, or perhaps by destiny. It all started one autumn afternoon, when a neighbor's family, concerned about Elisa's delicate health, organized a small task force to help her with some household chores. She, always very reserved, was reluctant to accept, but ended up giving in to the affection of those around her. One of these helpers was Gabriel, the neighbor's great-grandson and a history student. He was 17 years old, with attentive eyes and a curiosity that went beyond his years. While cleaning the antique furniture in the room, Gabriel found, in the bottom drawer of the dresser, a wooden box carefully stored among handkerchiefs. It was different from anything I had ever seen there. The wood was worn but well preserved. There was something sacred in that box. He hesitated, not wanting to invade the lady's privacy. But, curious, he showed the box to Elisa and asked, "With all due respect, can I open it?" Elisa, who at that moment was resting in her favorite armchair, looked at him in silence. His eyes took a moment to respond, as if quickly traveling through 70 years of memories. Finally, with a slight nod of the head, he said, "He can, but be careful. The story that lives inside is made of paper and of longing." Gabriel opened the box, as if touching a rare book. Inside, he found what at first glance seemed like simple objects: an old letter, folded with extreme care, a silver necklace in the shape of a cross, an aged photograph of a young soldier, and a dry rose, protected between two notebook pages. He didn't understand it, but he felt there was something sacred there, something that time had not been able to destroy. With the letter in his hands, he looked at Elisa again. "Was it your husband?" Elisa smiled, but not with sadness, with tenderness. "I didn't have a husband, my dear. I had Tomas." And for the first time in decades, she talked about him, about the ball where they met, about the letters exchanged during the war, about the last letter, the official visit, the silence that followed, about the choice to keep, for 70 years, the living memory of a love that had no end. He spoke with a lightness that surprised Gabriel, not as someone who mourns, but as someone who pays homage. He listened to everything in silence, deeply moved. It was as if I were facing a story that had escaped from the history books, only more vivid, more real, more painful, and more beautiful. This needs to be told, Donna Elisa." She looked at him sweetly and replied, "I waited a long time for someone to tell me that." In the days that followed, Gabriel returned more times. He recorded audio with Elisa telling details, scanned the letter to preserve it, researched war archives. He discovered that Tomas had actually served in that region. He found vague records, but none of them contradicted the story she told. On the contrary, everything confirmed the traits she had carefully preserved. Inspired, Gabriel wrote a text, non-academic, non-technical. He wrote like someone who writes a letter, with soul. He published the story on social media with the title, "She Kept the Letter for 70 Years and Never Got Over the Pain." Within days, the story went viral. People from all over the world commented, cried, and were grateful for knowing that story. They said they had never read something so pure, so sincere. Elisa, even without the internet, was now known by thousands of people. Local newspapers wanted to report. A documentary filmmaker got in touch. Teachers started using history in the classroom. And for the first time, Elisa and Tomas' love was no longer a silent secret. It was a shared memory. It was a tribute. She didn't seek fame. He didn't make a point of showing himself. But when Gabriel arrived one day with a box full of letters written by people touched by his story, Elisa cried. He cried like he hadn't done in a long time. Not out of pain, but out of gratitude. He left, but now, somehow, he's back. She said this with a sparkle in her eyes that hadn't been seen in a long time. It was as if Tomas was there again, being remembered, being loved by people who had never met him, but who now carried his story in their hearts. That day, Elisa reread the letter again, only this time, with Gabriel by her side. And when he got to the last sentence, she looked at him and said, "The love we experience, even if brief, can last forever if someone remembers." And at that moment, Elisa realized that her pain, previously so silent, had finally found an echo in the world. The story of Elisa and Tomas spread like wind across an open field. Gabriel's text had touched a deep chord in thousands of people, perhaps because it was real, perhaps because it spoke of a kind of love that the modern world seemed to have forgotten. Within days, messages began arriving from all corners. Young people who had never heard of the Second World War were moved by the strength of a feeling that had spanned 7 decades and still pulsed with the same intensity. Gabriel, until then an ordinary student, became an unexpected messenger of something greater. In interviews, he said that he had done nothing but give a voice to those who deserved to be heard. He was not the author of the story, just the instrument that allowed her to emerge from the silence. And the more he talked about Elisa, the more amazed he became. Not only because of her trajectory, but because of the way she lived. No hate, no revolt, just with love. Social networks were taken over by reflections. People said the story made them rethink the way they were loving. Many wondered if they would still be able to live a love with so much dedication, with so much loyalty, even without immediate reciprocity, even with absence. In a world where messages are deleted in seconds and relationships end with an unanswered emoji, Elisa's story seemed like a beacon, a reminder that love, true love, endures. In schools, teachers took the text to the classrooms. Young people wrote essays inspired by the story. A group of theater students put on a play based on Elisa's life. On stage, an actress represented her silent days, her readings of the letter, her solitary dances to the sound of the waltz that rocked her memories. At the end of the performance, the audience stood up in silence, many wiping their eyes. There was no spectacle, there was truth. Gabriel then realized that he had touched something universal. It wasn't just about Elisa, it was about all of us. About the losses we keep, the loves we don't forget, the letters we never send. It was about how feelings can cross time and, even in silence, continue to live in another chest. He began to receive reports from elderly people who, like Elisa, had saved letters, photographs, and love notes. Many of these stories were hidden in boxes, drawers, between pages of old books. Some had never been told. But now, inspired by Elisa's courage, they came to the surface. It was as if her story had unlocked other stories, as if true love was capable of freeing others, imprisoned for so long. Young couples also began writing letters to each other. A small tradition was reborn. Many sent their letters to Gabriel as a symbol of gratitude. "This is the first letter I've written by hand," said a 19-year-old girl. "I want him to know that love can be eternal, that I believe in that, because I knew Elisa's story." Another young man wrote, "I never understood how my grandmother felt about my grandfather, who died when I was little. But after meeting Elisa, I understood everything. Love doesn't need a lot of time, it just needs to be real." The commotion was so great that a publisher proposed turning the story into a book. Elisa, whose health was already more fragile, agreed, but with one condition, that the book would not be about the pain of loss, but about the beauty of having loved. "I wanted the current generation to know that even when everything seems to fall apart, love can be the bridge that keeps you standing." The book was published with the original title of Gabriel's Post. She kept the letter for 70 years and never got over the pain. But in the subtitle, Elisa's message came, because certain loves are not born to end. The launch of the book brought generations together, young readers, elderly couples, students and teachers. Everyone wanted to see this woman who had lived such an intense story up close. Elisa arrived calmly, hand in hand with Gabriel, who was now part of the family. She didn't give speeches. She didn't go on stage, she just sat in her chair, with the silver necklace around her neck and Tomas's letter in the pocket of her dress, and smiled. It was as if he were saying, "Now he is eternal, now he lives in you." That night, amid emotional applause, a new generation discovered love. Not that movie love, with perfect endings, but real love, which remains even when the other can no longer stay. The love that is written with patience, that is guarded with zeal, that is offered without demanding anything in return. And for everyone who heard that story, it was clear. Elisa and Tomas' love was not interrupted by the war. He just changed form and now ran silently into the hearts of everyone who had the privilege of knowing him. That year, Elisa turned 93 years old. The body no longer followed her as before. The steps were shorter, the hands were more shaky, the vision was slower, but his mind remained lucid, and his heart still carried firmly the names and dates that really mattered. Among them, one name, Tomas, and a date, April 17th, the day the last letter arrived. It was a calm morning. The sun filtered through the curtains and spread a golden glow throughout the room. Elisa woke up before the others, as she always did, and lay there, feeling the silence of the house. "I knew that day would be different. I felt this not as someone who fears, but as someone who prepares." He asked for help to sit in the armchair near the window. It was the place where I always read, wrote, or simply watched the world go by. Gabriel, now a young adult, was with her. He cared for Elisa with the same tenderness with which she had cared for the letter for so many years. There was an invisible bond between them, built on trust, respect, and, above all, love. "Today is the day," she said, her voice calm, almost a whisper. Gabriel didn't need to ask what she meant. He walked to the closet, opened the bottom drawer, removed the wooden box, and handed it into his hands. Elisa held it as if she was touching a lifetime. He opened it slowly. Inside there were still the same items: the silver necklace, the dried rose, the photograph, and the letter, yellowed, almost fragile like old skin. For a moment, she just looked at her, as if meeting someone again after a long time. Then, gently, he unfolded the paper and began to read. Tomas's words, read so many times over the decades, now sounded like a whisper straight to the heart. It was as if he were there, sitting next to her, saying it all again. "If I don't come back, keep me in you, in the calmest corner of your chest." She repeated the lines of the final poem like an old, familiar prayer. The tears didn't come. There was no more sadness, just a deep, serene peace, as if the mission was accomplished, as if that last reading was a wave of farewell, but also of reunion. Gabriel remained silent, respecting the moment. He observed Elisa as if he were in front of something sacred. She finished, reading each line carefully, as if closing a chapter that took her entire life to write. And when he folded the letter one last time, he did something he had never done before. He handed it to Gabriel. "Now it's your turn to take care." He hesitated. "He is sure?" "Yes," he replied with a slight smile. "But I want you to keep it with the same respect as me. This isn't just paper. It's love." Gabriel nodded, moved, carefully picked up the letter and placed it back in the box. Elisa rested her hand on his, with her eyes still turned to the horizon through the window. "You know, I waited my whole life for him, and I think he's always been here, just waiting for the right moment to pick me up." These were some of the last words Elisa spoke that day. For the next few hours, she slept, a peaceful, deep sleep, like someone who had finally found rest. During the night, he left peacefully, without pain, without agitation. It just was, like someone answering a sweet and silent call. On the day of the wake, the entire city attended. There was silence, flowers, tears, but there was also a sense of reverence. Everyone knew that Elisa had lived a rare story, that your love was one of those that marks generations. Next to the coffin, Gabriel placed the box, and on his chest rested the silver necklace. The letter was buried with her, by her will, not as an end, but as a reunion. The last reading of the letter was not goodbye, it was a homecoming. And that afternoon, to the sound of a soft waltz playing from afar, many swore they felt the presence of something eternal in that place. Maybe it was Tomas, maybe it was Elisa, maybe it was just love, keeping its promise. Some stories don't end with a full stop. They continue in echoes, memories, discreet smiles, and silences full of meaning. The story of Elisa and Tomas is one of those. A story that, even crossed by pain, survived time, loss, absence intact, because it was made of a love that is not corrupted, that does not require presence, that does not depend on daily reciprocity, but that simply is. When Elisa was buried with Tomas' letter next to her chest, it was not just the end of a life, but the celebration of a promise fulfilled. She had loved it, and he had been faithful to that love until the last day. Not out of obligation, not out of eternal mourning, but out of choice. Because there are bonds that do not require explanations. These are bonds that go beyond logic, age, and even the end of life. The people who followed this story were marked. Gabriel, especially, the young man who one day found an old letter hidden in a box, became the guardian of a powerful memory, and responsible for carrying it forward, and he took it. For years, he shared the story of Elisa and Tomas in lectures, books, documentaries, and on social media. With each new version told, more people were moved and reconnected with the idea of genuine love. But the impact went beyond words. Couples who were on the verge of separation reconciled after hearing the story. Young people who disbelieved in love found hope in her. Lonely people who carried old memories decided to write their own letters, even if to themselves. And in each of these reactions, the story of Elisa and Tomas was reborn. Because the true legacy of their love was not the letter, nor the necklace, nor even the memory of a lost war. It was a reminder that there is a type of love that overcomes time. A love that does not depend on the other being there, but that lives in the way we remember, in the way we choose to feel, in the space we leave open within us. Elisa's love taught that loving is also accepting absence, without it erasing presence. It's about keeping dancing even if the music stops. It's keeping in your heart a place where the other still breathes, even if the world says he's gone. And Tomas, even though he disappeared, even without a body, without a grave, without a recent photograph, he was more present in Elisa's life than many who lived alongside their loves every day, because what they had was made of essence, not routine. For real, not for convenience. A silent commitment, which did not need to be renewed in contracts. A letter was enough. In the end, Tomas' letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was an anchor, a home, an altar where Elisa deposited her purest affection. And even after being buried with her, that letter continued to exist. Not physically, but in the memory of those who heard the story, in the inspiration of those who decided to love better because of her. And perhaps that is the greatest power of true love. It does not die, it becomes a legacy, in seed, in example, and he lives forever in the hearts of those who had the honor of knowing him. Today, when someone reads the phrase, "She kept the letter for 70 years and never got over the pain," understands that it's not just a sad story, it's a deep story about the human capacity to feel, resist, and remain faithful to what we love. It's not a story with a happy ending, but it is, without a doubt, a story with a true ending. Because the love between Elisa and Tomas didn't need a reunion to be eternal. One letter was enough. All it took was a heart that chose not to forget. All it took was time to prove that when love is real, it conquers everything, even the weather. If this story touched your heart in some way, if it made you reflect on love, on memory, on what really remains when everything else passes. Then I ask you, reciprocate. I prepared every detail of this video with great care, so that you wouldn't just hear a story, but live an experience. If this changed you, even if just a little, like this video, share it with someone special and subscribe to the channel. Because when you do that, you're not just helping my work, you are helping this story reach other hearts. Stories like Elisa and Tomas deserve to be remembered and spread. If you felt it, then allow others to feel it too. Thanks for being here, and until the next story.